Today on Energy Contact, our spine is our main vertical structure, and way up here at the top of it, there's a brain up there. That spine is molded by our core, and the way we think is in turn molded and supported by our spine in very literal ways. Well, today we're going to see that there is no difference between the brain and the spinal cord. We're going to see what they're doing and what they have to do with our core. So sit up straight and clear your thoughts, because it's coming up right now on Energy Contact.
I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping, and I'll keep my mind on better things. I ain't gonna worry, and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping, and I'll keep my mind on better things. Just keep my mind on better things.
Hello and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series that I'm presenting as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of looking at yourself and a new way of looking at the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with yourself internally and with your environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. We love to classify and categorize and set these things out, but there's absolutely no difference. And so all of that health and vitality, all those good things take place at the interface, where we take that unseen energetic stuff and make it contact ourselves. We're presenting on this program a brand new paradigm that's thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. So let's move right ahead with that, and let's bring up that first slide. Everyone, please know that I am not a doctor. I don't want to be a doctor. I do not give medical advice. I might call myself a chakra healer or an energy healer, but state, federal, and local governments absolutely do not. There's a lot of important information on this slide, so I hope you'll keep it and look at it and view it with all awareness here. We'll leave it up for a couple of seconds, and then when we're done with that, I'll ask you to do me another favor, if you will. Please go locate a pencil and paper and bring it by you. Here's why. At the end of this program, we run credits. On those credits, there's contact information for me. I invite you to contact me. I hope you will. But in order to contact me, you're going to need my contact information. In order to get that, you're going to need a pencil and paper. The credits don't stay up there very long, so please get your pencil and paper now. All right, if everybody's got that information on the screen, we'll come back up here. Today's show is show number 29. If you're tuning in for the first time today, thank you. Thanks and welcome. I think you'll enjoy the show. There's a lot of good information on it. These shows are sequential. They're progressive. So we're talking about things today that we've introduced and explained on previous shows. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but I'm doing my very best to make each show have a lot of value on a standalone basis. So there's still plenty to get from this show. If it is your first time or one of your first times joining me, please, if what you see piques your interest, look around, because there are earlier shows that air later, either here in this cable area or perhaps in the different cable neighborhoods of some of your friends. And I'll appreciate you looking around and catching them if you're interested. All right, and finally, I want to introduce to you my co-host. It is with great pleasure that I introduce the brains of this outfit. This is my co-host, Slim. Since we're investigating what energy contacts in the physical self, we have to understand a few things, don't we? We have to understand something about energy, and this show is certainly about energy, but we also have to understand what it contacts. That energy way out there is meaningless to us. It's useless to us until we bring it into focus with our physical self. Slim is here to help us with that part, to understand that part of us that the energy contacts. Remember, a body without energy is just a corpse. An energy without a body, well, it might be a number of things, but it's not human. All right. Previously on Energy Contact, we have been talking about the body intellect, haven't we? The body intellect and the anatomy that it builds. We've seen how the same materials in our brains that give us thought, recall, reason, memory, intellect, all those things that we've been told all of our lives are brain functions, how in fact they are in every cell of our body, and how that body intellect builds us. We've been looking over the past few shows at our spine. First we looked at it structurally, but here the past few shows we've been looking at some non-structural aspects of it. We've been looking at the nervous system that runs through our spine. Within this nervous system, we've seen that there is a close, tangible, measurable relationship between the spine, the brain, and our guts, our core, much closer than cliché or analogy. This has come to no surprise to my longtime viewers. We've been speaking just a little bit, just a touch, about this mysterious energy that old Indian mystics call Kundalini energy. And we've observed what all of this has to do with our core. Well, today, we're taking it right up to the top. We're going to look at our brains a little bit today. Not the entire function of our brains, that's an immense subject. Today, we're just looking at the nervous system function of our brain. Then we'll see what that has to do with the nervous system function of our spine and of our core. So today's a lot of review. We got to review and assemble and integrate all the nervous system information we've been looking at for the past few shows. Put it into a cohesive package. And we're going to see that with respect to this nervous system, we absolutely cannot separate brain function from spinal cord function. And it would be a stupid idea even if we could. And just maybe, just barely, we can separate all of that from the functioning of our core. And maybe that wouldn't be such a smart idea either. Well, the spine is in the middle, and it has a lot of work to do, structurally and otherwise. So we're going to look at all that. And ultimately, remember, we want to get to an understanding of what we've been doing without our awareness to block energy flows, so we can unclog all that, and so that we can allow our spine to facilitate and promote this upward flow of this Kundalini energy, up from the bottom of our core, out through the top of our brains. All right, so we have a lot of ground to cover today. But before we charge in, take a moment to sit back and relax, because now it's the part of our show where we visualize. We're going to take a virtual field trip, a journey in our mind's eye. And today's field trip is a little Management 101 field trip. We're going to go to a company, let's say a manufacturing company, a factory with an adjoining office, and we're going to try to spend a little bit of their money. You'll see that to do that, we're going to have to work our way up the ladder. Let's start at the beginning. First, we'll go to the receptionist, and you'll tell that receptionist that we need a couple of bucks to buy some postage stamps, maybe a ream of copier paper. She says, sure. She opens up her drawer, pulls out a little cash, hands it to you, and says, don't forget to bring me back the receipt. All right, so we come back with our supplies and with her receipt, and then we tell her, you know what, now we need some supplies for the factory. We need some tools, things like that. Receptionist says, I can't authorize that. I don't have that kind of money. You'll have to go to the plant foreman. So we do. And the plant foreman approves our request. He gives us a purchase order number, and off we go. A little bit later, we come back with those things, and we say to that plant foreman, this is great, but now we need to make a major raw materials purchase. He replies, you know what? I can't authorize that. You're going to have to talk to the production manager. Okay, so on it goes. You get the idea. Maybe we want to do some financial investing, and somebody's going to tell us we have to go to the chief financial officer or the accounting department. But what we discover is that the higher we go, the more command system our needs are. Now, all of a sudden, we've discovered that we need a major $1 million, maybe multi-million-dollar piece of capital machinery, capital equipment. And so off we go to guess where? The boss, the big boss, the top boss of the whole company. For something that major, we got to take it all the way to the top. And you know what? If this company is a corporation, even he might not be able to make the call. There's a board of directors and stockholders and creditors and all sorts of things that get into the picture. You get the idea. The more major or the more command center the decision, the further we have to take it up the ladder. Well, our body intellect is no different than that. Today, we're going to go right up to the top of the nervous system, literally and figuratively. Hold that thought because we have some reviewing to do. We've been talking about the nervous system over the past few shows. Let's bring up the next slide and we'll review that a little bit. The nervous system, in general, can be thought of as that chief administrator of all the body parts and functions. It's like the function of corporate management. That nervous system goes through every single part of our anatomy, but it operates, as you see here, basically from our spine, our brain, and our intestines. We've learned that this nervous system is divided into two main categories, or at least that's what they used to tell us: the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system. We can see from these pictures that the peripheral nervous system hooks into the central nervous system at or near the spine. We've looked a lot at the spine and the gut and the peripheral nervous system in past shows, and today we're bringing it back up to the brain. You see on those pictures there, there's spine. Now that black and white fellow on the, the left side of the picture, he's got vertebra. But look at those other two things. There are no vertebra in those pictures. That's just spinal cord and nerve. That spinal cord has no structure of its own. It's sort of like a snake. That spinal cord, along with the brain, is what composes and comprises the central nervous system. Let's take a look at that cranial part of the central nervous system. We'll go right to the next slide. See what's going on top here. Up at the top, what you're going to see is at the top of the snake there's a brain. And looking up at the brain from the bottom, you can see where the nervous system terminates on this side. Can we get that next slide up there? There we are. And you see, look at that little guy's head at the bottom in the middle there. That shows you the vantage point that you're looking from. Those yellow things at the bottom of the brain, that brain in the big picture of the brain, those are called the cranial nerves. Also, you'll notice at the back of those cranial nerves, look at the beginnings of that little cord coming out of the spine, and you'll see a little H-like thing looking on it if you look very closely. Going back to that middle picture, you see all of that yellow stuff there is basically the part of our brain that deals with our central nervous system. All right, this is where we're heading today. But hold on to all that because we've got to come back up here for a second and review a little bit more. So let's come back. The central nervous system is the command center, remember. It's the board of directors. The peripheral nervous system kind of plugs into it. But way off at the end of the peripheral nervous system, we've found something very important. We saw there that there's another system that thinks and works differently than anything else in the nervous system. Anything peripheral, central, parasympathetic, it's completely different. It's got a mind of its own, yet it's still nervous system. It operates on a completely different brain, as we've seen, and it's the same instinctive brain that is in pre-vertebrates, our evolutionary ancestors. That system is called the enteric nervous system, and we're going to talk about it for just a second. It's located in your intestines, in your guts, in your core. It has a completely independent brain, and modern science didn't have a clue, didn't know about it until late in the 20th century, until the 1970s. That's why many of you have never heard of such a thing. All right, as evolution occurred in animals, and by animals I mean you and I, animals developed brains and spines. But that previous brain, that gut brain, that instinct brain, it didn't go away. The head brain just sort of grafted it in, like plugging a microchip into a central supercomputer. So you have this brain, this gut brain, this enteric brain working in you right now. It's active every second of every day. Know it or not, that brain is working in you. It's thinking in you. It's completely independent and it's strong. That enteric nervous system, it might not be the president of the company, but it sure can go on strike and mess a few things up. It can halt production. So we need to get in touch with that brain. However, we have two brains, and on today's show, we're more interested in the other brain, the brain you've heard about all your life, the brain that's up here on the top of our heads. So we got to take a second to figure out how we can get from this core brain up to this top brain. Well, what is it that connects the core brain from the top brain? Well, nerves, and a bunch of them. But if we look in that core, we'll see one of those nerves in particular, and it's called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is one of those 12 nerves that we saw plugging into the back of the brain. It's important because it's the only brain nerve that goes directly from our core, upstream through our spine and right into our brain. Energy falls up, so we're going to move up with it. We're going to retrace our steps from this enteric system back up our spine so we can find who's running what part of the office in the factory. And as we travel upward, we'll pass through the spine and we'll pass through all those peripheral nerves, the spinal nerves. There's 31 pairs of them that we pass on the way to get to these 12 pairs of cranial nerves on top. 31 and 12, that makes 43. For our purposes, we can think of all of our nerves, every nerve, every neuron in our body, of emanating from one of these 43 pairs, some way, somehow. But today, we're interested in the cranial nerves, the 12 up top. Whew. All right, this is technical stuff, so let's take a second, let's catch our breath. There's more technical stuff coming, so we want to refresh why we want to cover all this stuff in the first place and where we're going with it. Because as you know, it's not our goal on Energy Contact to just learn a bunch of dry anatomy strictly for the purpose of knowing anatomy. That's why people go to anatomy classes. We're looking at two things today. We want to look at the nervous system in the brain, at the cranial nerves, and we want to assemble and integrate what's going on up here with all the stuff we've been looking at over the past few shows. Why? So we can understand how our core, our spine, and our brain are all subordinated to the chairman of the board, to that body intellect we've been talking about since the very first episode of Energy Contact. And what about this Kundalini energy I keep mentioning, huh? We've barely defined it, but we know that we want to facilitate its easy movement from the bottom of us right out the top of our heads. Okay. So that's where we're going. Break's over. You ready to get back to work? Here goes. Our brain and our spinal cord, which are our central nervous system, remember there's no difference between our brain and our spinal cord, they are protected by things called meninges. You may not have ever heard of meninges or know what they are, but you've heard of meningitis, which is an inflammation of them. These meninges are important because they provide protections at different parts of the brain and the spinal cord. They're the shock absorbers. They're egg crates, if you will. They're bubble wraps. Let's bring up a slide and look at some meninges here. There's 3 of them, actually. 3 layers of meninges. You can see there over on the left side of that picture, that gentleman has lost his head, or at least a part of it. And you can see the 3 layers of meninges. That sort of very light bluish, tissue paperish looking stuff there in the middle of his skull, that's pia mater, which is Latin for tender mother. The middle strip there, the darker blue, kind of the translucent stuff, that is called arachnoid mater. Arachnoid means spider. And then there on the other side, covering the whole right side of his skull, that looks like skull, but it's not. His skull is cut away. That's some tissue, it's hard tissue called dura mater. And dura mater is Latin for hard mother. And you can think of these things as sort of mothering and nurturing your brain, all this sensitive nervous system stuff. And they're covering the brain. The way we're seeing them there is very oversimplified, but you can get the idea. Over on the other side at the top, if you can make it out, you see a little bit more detailed stuff. That's the brain at the base, or towards the end of the skull. The very outside of that is the skull. And those little tooth-like, those molary looking things on the bottom are brain cells. And you can see that pia mater is way down there. And then below that, that's a picture of a vertebra. And what do you see covering the vertebra? Meninges, the same meninges. All right, but that dura mater, let's come back to that. That's important stuff to us. Dura means hard, like the word durable. It's an outside sheath of tissue that coats both the brain and the spinal cord. It forms a sheath around the brain, and then it goes down around the cord. It insulates the spine all the way down, actually past the spinal cord, down to the tailbone. As you recall, the spinal cord's short. It ends somewhere about at our bottom rib. But down at the tailbone and towards that, at that point, those nerves are they're in a sheath. This dura mater forms a sheath, much like the nerves are like the wire in a nice, sort of a heavy insulating casing, like any high voltage electrical wire. All right, let's come back up here for a second, and we'll talk about this dura mater just a little bit more. It's watertight in addition to all of its other stuff. It's a container. It's a membrane, a wrapper. It's a spinal cord wrapper, and it holds a bunch of stuff in place. It holds all the hydraulics that make the energy fall up. At some point, by the way, they stop calling the brain a brain, and they start calling it a spinal cord. Well, at some point, they stop calling the dura mater, and they start calling it the dural sheath. Doesn't matter. Makes no difference. One of the things that dura tissue is holding is cerebrospinal fluid. What's that? Well, the entire surface of our brain and our central nervous system and our brain stem and our spinal cord is bathed in this clear, colorless solution that we call cerebrospinal fluid. This stuff is contained in the brain and in the spine. Remember, there's no division, driving that point home today. And this fluid has two important purposes. It is the hydraulics. It's the hydraulics that the dural sheath holds. It helps the energy fall up. It's the fluid medium that everything operates in. And like the meninges, like all three of the meninges, it's a shock absorber. All right, well, what else is inside that dura mater? Let's take a look. Bring up another slide here. Here's the slide of the spinal cord kind of going next to your vertebrae there, and in the other section, a little segment, a little cross-section of spinal cord stuff. See that H there? That's the H I mentioned earlier. That's stuff called gray matter. Haven't you always heard that gray matter is something in your brain? Well, it is. The gray matter houses the sensory system of the central nervous system. That's the receiver. It takes signals in. The white matter is that disc around it, and it houses the motor system. That's the transmitter. Sends the messages from the central nervous system out to the perimeters of your bodies. On the other side of that picture, you can see how that all fits very snugly right along the vertebral column through some holes called the vertebral foramen. But let's come back over to the other side again, back to that H. See right in the middle of that H, right in that crossbar there, there's a tiny little dot, a little hole. That little canal is called the central canal, and that's where all the cerebrospinal fluid lives and flows. And it flows through that tiny little pinhole all the way from the brain at the top to the coccyx, the tailbone down below. Okay, let's come back up here. When you hear of somebody getting a spinal tap, what they're doing is tapping your spine, just like they tap a maple tree to get a little of that fluid. And they can tell what's going on in your brain up here by looking at what comes out down here. But why are we talking about all that stuff down here when we want to know what's going up here? What about the brain? The body intellect does not know where the brain ends and the spinal cord begins. The body intellect does not care about anatomy. The desire to separate and categorize is an obsession of the Western analytical mind. And more often than not, in most of us, this obsession is dysfunctional. So, cerebrospinal fluid and what else? Cerebrospinal fluid and meninges and gray matter and white matter and nerves and neurons and axons and dendrites. All this stuff, it all resides in or flows through or surrounds or covers this whole enchilada here that we've been looking at today. All right, let's take another little break for just a second and meet a couple of new friends. Let's bring up another slide here. See these guys here? Why do you think that people who draw and dream up aliens always draw them up with these big domes that either protrude out of the back of their head or they have these exoskeletons that go down their spine? Well, it's because the people that design these things have a couple of things going on. One, they've had Anatomy 101, and two, they have a little imagination. So they know that the spinal cord is just the brain and vice versa, and that the reason ours is going down our back could be considered just an accident of birth or something. So these guys, their spinal cords are doing different things. It's all brain. But let's go from our buddies' brains here back to our own. Let's go immediately to another slide. Here we are. We finally made it back to where we started off here. We've made it to the board of directors, the cranial nerves. This is where everything starts from a nervous system perspective. I say this is where everything starts and everything's going on. But keep in mind that our gut brain is still working in our core. But up here, this is the command center. Cranial nerves are located, again, it's the yellow things on both sides here. They're located along the base of the brain. This is known as the ventral side of the brain. You can see them here as all those little yellow gizmos running along the center and the base of the brain. The cranial nerves, they manage things like senses of vision, smell, hearing, among many other things. These things are not reflexes per se, but they do happen automatically. When you get back towards the back of the head, what they're calling the ventral side of the head here, at the back of it is the cerebellum, and then the brain stem. As you look at the brain stem there, you'll notice again, if you look very carefully, that little H. All right, that's all the time we have for today. I thank you for joining me. We'll look at more of this later. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in Energy Contact.
Just keep my mind on better things.